Thanks for inviting me. Pleased to be here. That was a great intro. If you could go to the next slide, I'm gonna. Oh, keep one more. That's just a placeholder. There you go. So Carolyn mentioned some of the projects that I've worked on. Here's some graphics to go with that. Uh, I've had in 33 years, and this is 1992, I think is when I started. I've had the amazing opportunity to work on some really fun projects, and some of them turned out to be fairly impactful. Um, just really glad for those opportunities. And one of the things that I like to do is also try to give those chances back to other people. So that's one of the reasons I work on the Guild is to pay it forward to others who could benefit from similar, sort of pay it forwards that I received in my career as I started. So thank you. So we actually did coin the term spatial computing, at least as applied to VR. It'd been used in GIS before, but 33 years ago, we were using this term. And I've had the good fortune to work on all these other projects as well. Keyhole turned into Google Earth, and most recently, the biggest thing I worked on was Apple Vision Pro, which we might want to talk about later. But the HoloLens was also a big breakout, getting Microsoft to really buy into AR. And Echo Frames, if you don't forget, was an attempt to start at the low end of something that's a little more like the Meta Ray-Bans today, something that might just be audio only, and then maybe add cameras, and then maybe add a display later, but start with something fashionable. So that was a really, I think, important way to come at the problem. Do you want to go to the next slide, please? So one of the things I like to talk about a lot is, and I think Matt talked about this a little bit too, is the hype cycle and where all the attention goes. So this is just my attempt to graph what I remember of all the attention cycles. And it's sort of a complement to the kind of Gartner hype cycle, but puts it all in one place. And you kind of get to see that when one cycle is up, the other cycles are down. There's never more than one thing really hot at any given time, but they come and go. So the AI cycle was the most recent one that we went through. Of course, we had the Metaverse cycle. And I'm kind of glad that spatial computing didn't turn into one of these giant blown up things, because I think it's a term that can stick around for a long time, but it doesn't need to be hyped. It's just a very descriptive term for the kind of things that we do. But of course, AI is coming down a little bit as people realize that it's not good for everything. And I think that Scott's observation that it kind of blows out the lower 50%, I think is a good one, because if you think of AI as the average of all people put together, somehow it's sort of the collaboration of all of us with or without our consent. Um, you got to remember, if it's the average of all of us, then if you're like a really good writer, you're still going to be above that average. But if you're a really bad writer, it might bring you up to the average. So AI is kind of great for people when they need a shortcut, but it's not great if you're already really good at something. It isn't necessarily going to make you better. It might just save you some time. We're starting to realize that. If you want to move on to the next slide, one of the things that comes up just in terms of industry outlook is, what's that going to do? Like, how are we going to deal with this? And we've been through this before. This is not new. The printing press was incredibly disruptive to the prior industries, and it took hundreds of years, but eventually, hopefully it doesn't take hundreds of years. Hopefully we're talking about on the order of hundreds, maybe a couple dozen months. But eventually it led to a set of rights that people had. The authors had moral rights, there are publisher rights, purchaser rights. All this stuff got worked out. It just took a long time back then. And hopefully we're going to spend a little more time figuring out the right way to handle this so that people are not abused, so that creators are actually valued and rewarded. And it's in the AI company's best interest to not be stealing content, because they're going to need more of it. They're going to need people to create more stuff. And so we have to have an economy that actually creates a richness for everybody involved, and not just the people who are paying for the technology. Next slide, please. Another issue I think that comes up, this made me feel like switching gears, but it's a short presentation, is that the metaverse topic that we talk about a lot, I think has gone a little bit off the rails, especially when you talk about the way Meta's doing it. There really is a key difference between what they think of as the objective reality that everybody shares and brings in all sorts of bad actors, and a consensual reality which is more like this. Like, people here who might misbehave are going to get kicked out. There's rules, there's ways that we behave, but you don't see that in large groups. So this is something that we're going to have to grapple with as an industry, to come up with standards of behavior that can apply, and we're not really ready to do that yet. That's a good reason why the metaverse has not really taken off. I'm almost at the end of 5 minutes, so we'll go breeze through the last two slides. If you can go one more. Um, Next slide. I set a timer for myself. So really what we're trying to build here is the idea that we can put UX anywhere. The world becomes our canvas for being able to put UX. And one of the most important qualities of that, if you go one more slide, and this will be my last one, is that it really fosters collaboration. I mentioned AI is essentially collaboration among many humans, voluntary or not. What we really want to enable is collaboration among humans with AI as an adjunct to that. So we should be thinking of ourselves as being in these custom spaces with other people and with AI helping out and with awareness of what our kids and our pets are doing. And this is really the vision for where, sort of in terms of industry outlook of where all this stuff is heading, is a full virtualization of reality, but it's a layer on top of reality. We're still grounded in reality, but we get to bring in all these extra things, all these really cool tools on top of it. But we're still human at the end of the day. We haven't lived in the computer. We're not uploading ourselves. We're just making our lives better, and that's the goal that I work for. And so at some point, I'm sure we'll talk about the XR Guild and how that might play into that. But that's all my slides for right now.
Awesome. Thank you, Avi. So I have to ask, since you have talked about and you've been working in the area of privacy, and there is such a need for governance and for transparency, I'm curious about if you have any thoughts about utilizing decentralized economies like blockchain and others. And I know that some of that is still nascent, but the foundational concepts around those are that they can incentivize a governance in a way that enables people to have a voice and to have it just has a lot of that potential. So I'm curious about if you've ever what your opinions about that is.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of opinions on that. I think that the first thing is just that these are good ideas, but they've had really crappy implementation in technology. So whoever's been implementing things like wallets, crypto wallets, should be fired because the things are unsafe. They really are not appropriate. The fact that somebody can come in and steal all your stuff by clicking on one thing is just that's just negligent. And that's true of a lot of the design of a lot of these crypto systems is they really were built with good ideas, but really not very good technology. Not the least of which is the fact that that proof of work will eventually consume all the energy on the planet if you follow the trend. So we have some better technologies now. We have proof of stake. We have other things that improve it. But the goal of decentralization is a good one, in that we should take the power back from these massive tech companies that are controlling everything and have more control over our own data, have more control over the choices that we make. And I think a moderate example of that's not an example of crypto, is I spend a lot more time on Blue Sky now, where you have a lot more control
Mhm.
over your own feed, right? So you get to pick how you want to consume the data. You don't have to follow what an ad-driven model is trying to force on you. You still wind up doom scrolling these days, but that's a separate issue. You do have a lot of control, but it is still somewhat centralized. Places where decentralization really matter are the places where a company can either go out of business and take all the data with them, or potentially sell the data. Like, for example, 23andMe we're talking about them being bought. What happens to all of your private DNA data when somebody buys them? Who buys them? Is it going to be private equity? Who knows? And so you really want control of that. But you don't want to be putting really private data out on a public blockchain. That's a mistake I think a lot of people make, is to say, we could just encrypt it. It's not going to work, because any encryption that you use today can be broken in 5 or 10 years, and that data will never go away. So we have to be really, really careful about the tech that we use. Sorry, that's a little bit of a long answer, but there's lots of nuance there.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. So I'm curious about if you can describe one ethical challenge that the industry needs to address before XR can really build a greater adoption. What do you
Yeah.
think that might be?
Well, I mentioned a few in the talk that I won't spend too much more time on, but this idea of these shared objective spaces versus consensual spaces is an ethical issue, because, and by the way, when I say ethics, don't be thinking right versus wrong. It's not about morality. It's about getting the best possible outcomes and learning from the mistakes that we've made. That's how I define ethics. And we should learn that throwing a bunch of strangers into a room with no rules doesn't work, right? That's an ethical issue. Is do we keep trying that, or do we learn from it and try something new? We talked about a few of those issues with blockchain, and AI has a whole bunch of these ethical issues, which I think in this case, the ethical issue with AI is we need to create an economy that benefits everybody, right? The companies that deploy the tech should get some benefit because they're spending a lot of capital to get there, but the creators also need to have a benefit from it, and they can't be cut out because we need them. If you don't have creators, it's like a snake eating its own tail. Eventually, you're going to have a bunch of crap, and the AI will just sort of turn into a soup of horrible mid content that nobody likes. So you need human inspiration in the loop, and therefore we have to pay them. That's an ethical conundrum that says, let's figure that out. Let's apply AI to the question of solving the problem of how do we properly compensate incremental improvements in ideas, where people always share ideas and nothing is ever really original, but people do get inspiration along the way. And how do we make sure those people are properly compensated for the value add that they provide, so that they'll keep doing it, so that they'll keep providing value and making the world richer instead of more like mayonnaise?